Buon pomeriggio. Devo cominciare con una confessione. Non sono Saskia Sassen, mi dispiace. La professoressa Sassen non ce l'ha fatta ad arrivare e quindi volentieri mi sono piegato alla richiesta del mio segretario generale. Io sono il presidente della Fondazione, mi chiamo Roberto Toscano, ho fatto il diplomatico per 40 anni e adesso sono felicemente in un think tank a Washington e faccio lo studioso. Non sono Saskia Sassen, ma sentirete molte cose che hanno a che vedere con una impostazione filosofica. Non vi parlerò in chiave di diplomazia e neanche di politica estera, anche se il tema del cosmopolitismo si presta anche ad essere affrontato con una forte dimensione di politica internazionale, che magari potremo toccare insieme. Non esiste una sola fondazione teorica o ideologica per il cosmopolitismo. Esiste un pensiero tendenzialmente cosmopolita in varie tradizioni, risaliamo alla Grecia, agli stoici, risaliamo anche al cristianesimo, quando San Paolo dice non c'è né uomo né donna né bianco né nero perché siamo tutti uniti nella fede, è un modo di superare la divisione. È un modo ancora incompleto perché si riferisce soltanto a chi condivide la stessa fede. Questo è vero anche nell'Islam. L'Islam è una religione transrazziale e transculturale da molti punti di vista, tanto è vero che va dal Marocco fino alle Filippine. Quindi, e nei Balcani, fino ai Balcani abbiamo l'Islam. Quindi sono tutti tipi di pensieri e di civiltà che cercano di andare oltre la limitatezza di una particolare comunità. Io però vorrei affrontare soprattutto il cosmopolitismo come necessità etica, perché di questo credo da questo dobbiamo partire. Io credo che l'etica stia al centro del discorso sul cosmopolitismo. Perché? I principi dell'etica, se li studiamo da un punto di vista comparativo, tendono a coincidere ampiamente nelle varie culture e nelle varie religioni. Quello che però è importante vedere è qual è l'area di applicazione di questi principi. Dove si traccia il cerchio di riconoscimento della responsabilità etica? È qui che vediamo le differenze. L'individualista patologico, quello che in inglese si chiama il sociopath, traccia questo confine attorno a se stesso, al di fuori del proprio interesse, delle proprie pulsioni, delle proprie passioni, non riconosce nient'altro, nessun dovere. Poi abbiamo chi traccia il confine attorno alla propria famiglia. Sapete che c'è il termine familismo amorale. Il familista amorale può essere un santo all'interno della famiglia e una belva al di fuori. È un'altra opzione etica possibile. L'altra, la più diffusa probabilmente, è quella dello Stato-nazione, perché è stata rafforzata da pedagogia nazionalista in tutti i paesi per lunghi periodi, dalla formazione dello Stato-nazione fino ai giorni nostri. È quello che poi finisce per esprimere il famoso detto "My country, right or wrong?" E si sono commessi tanti wrongs per il paese, come se...
Toscano, mi scusi se la interrompo, volevo solo fare una domanda.
Sì.
Se possibile volevo capire quindi, se è ufficiale che sarà in italiano tutto il...
Mi è stato detto, io volentieri, se volete, faccio in inglese.
Non ho sentito quando ha chiesto.
Ha detto che avevano spostato lui con l'altro gruppo.
Mi avevano detto che avevano già avvertito.
Però avevamo l'aspettativa di avere un modulo in inglese, no? Quindi insomma
Se facciamo una cosa, siete a favore del modulo inglese, che fra l'altro faremo anche un piacere a chi preferisce l'inglese, ok? Great. I almost prefer. No. My notes are in English, to give you an idea.
Thank you very much.
All right. So, the circle of recognition can be drawn at a nation state, when this is the most usual. But then you can draw it around your religion if you conceive of it in what's called a fundamentalist approach. Or you can draw your circle around your race, or around your political party. think of all the history of communism. The history of communism says that for the party, people who wouldn't do something bad on a personal basis would commit even big crimes. Well, I served for 5 years in the Soviet Union in the 1970s, and there the experience of the country was that even people who were good did awful things because they only recognized allegiance to the party. Okay, all these are partial ethical dimensions. I think only cosmopolitanism allows us to include everybody within the circle of moral responsibility and moral recognition. You know, after all, what I think we should do is to reverse the sentence that was uttered by the first murderer, the one who said, when God asked, "Where is Abel?" He said, "Am I my brother's keeper?" He was the first murderer. He disclaimed responsibility. So I think cosmopolitan ethics would be, on the contrary, to say, we are our brother's keepers, whoever they are and wherever they are. It's a big challenge because it doesn't come natural. What comes natural is to be good with people who are next to us, who are similar, who speak the same language, who have the same religion. If they belong to the same family, it's even better. But this is the problem. Now, we can address cosmopolitanism from different points of view. Identity, for instance. You know, the first conference that was organized by the Intercultura Foundation in Siena a couple of years ago was on identity. So there is a logical thread going from the discourse on identity to the one on cosmopolitanism. Why? Identity is very important. We have to be very clear that cosmopolitanism does not abolish identity. We will not become all the same. As they say, God forbid. But the concept of identity has to be addressed in a correct way. Reality, real human beings, if you consider them genetically, anthropologically, culturally, linguistically, are not one thing only. Identities are always plural. Every person has different dimensions. So one can be Italian, male or female, right or left, religious or not religious. These are all components of a complex identity. Why am I saying this? Because if you have only one identity, you become dangerous. If you only have one identity, for that identity, you can do pretty nasty things because you do not reflect within yourself the complexities of reality, of human beings as they are. Whereas on the contrary, if you have multiple identities, you will identify with different groups and you will not belong completely in only one group. You will not have only one dimension. This can be linked to another concept which is important in religion, especially in Jewish and Christian religion. It's the concept of idolatry. Idolatry is not worshiping a false god, you know, the golden calf or something like that. Idolatry is worshiping anything, even something good, as if it were God. Meaning, making relative into absolute. If you have only one dimension, be it religious, being the nation, being the family, it becomes idolatric. On that altar, you're ready to sacrifice everything else. This is extremely important. The objection to this approach is that people become idolatric vis-a-vis a certain identity when that identity is denied or repressed. So we have to be very clear on that. For instance, if they don't allow you to practice your religion, then religion becomes a dominant concern, a dominant identity. So I'm not saying that people have difficulty in recognizing the plural identity that they carry within themselves, but it is not only because of a natural tendency to be closer to one aspect instead of the other, but also because of the condition, the political conditions in which they live. So that this discourse is linked up to a political discourse. In an article, there was, maybe some of you saw that, an interview that was published yesterday in Repubblica that was badly transcribed, but it's okay. If you want the whole text, I have it. I said that I defined cosmopolitanism as anti-idiocy. Why? Because etymologically, idiot means closed within your own particular way of being. Idiot, in Greek, means somebody who's narrowly locked into a specific way of being. And that's why an idiot is somebody who doesn't see difference outside this specificity, this particularity. We have to link all this to the conditions of the present world in the era of globalization. One is almost tired to talk about globalization because everybody is talking about it, but we cannot avoid it, really. Let me point at a very perverse effect, a counterintuitive effect of globalization. Globalization tears down the walls, makes communications universal and easier, and so it should be a wonderful path to a cosmopolitan ethic, because this is what we need. Since we all have to live together materially, let us have the necessary software in terms of ethics. Anthropologists will tell you that the great advantage of the human animal was the capacity to cooperate with others. A human individual without the social dimension wouldn't have survived in the conditions of struggle for existence and animal threats. The great strength was not physical. The great strength was the capacity to cooperate, right? To cooperate in small groups, and then in bigger groups, and then in nation states. But now the stage has come to cooperate on a global basis because it's a need, it's not a preference. But there is a problem here. Those walls were also a protection, and this links up to identity. There is psychologists will say that there is a pathology that's called agoraphobia, that when you find yourself in an open space and you want a narrow space, you want a little corner that makes you feel more protected. And this is very, very deep. Remember once reading a book by a French psychoanalyst, Ehrenberg. In French, it's called La fatigue d'être soi, the fatigue of being oneself. And he says, in traditional Freudian concept, there is the fact that repression, the impossibility to pursue your pulsions, your passions, creates psychic suffering. He says today, everything theoretically is possible, but you're not up to it. they tell you, please, and you know you cannot. In all terms, money, sex, everything is available, but you know you cannot achieve that. And that is the opposite way of psychic suffering, when not psychic disease. This is what's happening right now. Never, as today, people are talking about identity, but intended in a very narrow sense, in a militant sense, in a hostile sense. Because today, we feel always invaded. I'm not talking about current events, but I could. We feel invaded. We feel that we no longer have our own space, which is protected from the outside world. So paradoxically, the moment of maximum opening, globalization, communication becomes the moment of maximum fear and of maximum rejection of everything that is different, of everything that we have difficulty understanding and coping with. This is a passage that we have to address, and it will require a lot of good thinking and of even good politics, but it is difficult. I said politics. Let's make very clear that cosmopolitanism doesn't mean being an abstract human being without specificities, without a specific culture, without a specific language. But it's widening your circle of moral identification and also your skills, which are also linguistic and cultural, to understand what's going on beyond the little border within which you were used to living. Cosmopolitan doesn't mean stateless. In Italian, I would say, un cosmopolita non è una polide. It doesn't mean stateless. It means something else. It means having a wider identification. We have started doing something like that politically. Today, an Italian can say, I belong to my own city. In Italy, for the non-Italians, cities are very important as a political and cultural identification, more than the region. The city is very important in Italy. So I'm in my own city, I'm Italian, and then we add, I'm European. In spite of all the criticism we have justified towards Europe, we already have a dimension we recognize beyond the nation state. I think we just have to take another step and recognize our global belonging. But this is too easy. What I've been telling you is something that I deeply believe in, but I also will be my own devil's advocate and will start phrasing some objection, and maybe we can discuss about it. We say cosmopolitan, but where is the polis? Polis is a political concept. Polis is not a geographical or not a cultural, not a moral concept. It's political, as the word says. We have a cosmopolis if we think in terms of international trade and if we think about the fact that finance, environment, terrorism, disease, these things don't recognize borders anymore. They happen somewhere else, we suffer from them, and we don't handle them. So it would make good sense to look beyond, to see what we can do in order not to be just passive, okay? But we have a cosmopolis, but if you allow me to mix Greek and Latin, we have a cosmopolis, but we have no civis. Where's the citizen? The fundamental point is, where is the citizen? Now, it's a meager consolation to say that also nation states are in trouble because the citizen is nowhere to be found these days. The citizen is in trouble everywhere. Because look, the consumer is not the citizen. The believer in a fundamentalist sense, is not a citizen. The citizen is something else, but it's a very difficult and very fragile entity. And lately, for reasons that are very complex, but they are true everywhere, the dimension of a citizen is to be rebuilt in a way. Because with Ramin Janbeglu here, we've been talking a lot about democracy, but we have to, while we defend democracy, especially for the countries that don't have it yet, we have to be critical and not paint a rosy picture. It's very problematic these days. Where is the polis of the, where is the cosmopolis? The world state not only is not possible, but I think it's not desirable, because a world state would really tend to be a world culture. Well, it's what happened with the nation state. The nation state came about usually by joining different cultural, linguistic, and then from the center, they say, we have to unify it through not just repression, also the pedagogical tool was used to homogenize. And homogenizing means also losing variety and losing richness and losing the salt of the earth. The world states beside would not be a democracy, would not be a republic, it would be an empire. In the year 2012 AD, Emperor Caracalla passed an edict making everybody who lived within the Roman Empire Roman citizen. But it was an empire. The Roman Republic would have never done it because it was not conceivable. Because in order to be a citizen in the Roman Republic, you had to be able to be there to participate, to be really... The other is a way of embracing a political body which is not a republic, but which is run as an empire. Now, empires are very interesting. They've been very much not only criticized, but even slandered sometimes. Sometimes, looking at the way the nation states have behaved, one can say they were not so bad after all. And they were not so bad also from the point of view of what we're talking about here, cosmopolitanism. But I will go back to that a little later, talk about the cities, which is, I'm getting to the point of the subject that has been advertised. Cosmopolitan governance should be organized on different levels. It has to be necessarily plural. If it's not plural, if it's not on different levels, it will not be a republic, it will not be a democracy. If you want to unify, then you have to sacrifice in terms of freedom and variety. And this is not what we propose when we say cosmopolitanism. What are we seeing today? Today we're seeing that there is something that is already taking shape. Not world government, but there is something more and more similar to world civil society. Think of NGOs, think of campaigns on human rights, think of environment. There is something going on that really goes beyond borders and has been producing real results. There wouldn't be a treaty on anti-personnel landmines without a world civil society. It's something that, as I said, it's only the beginning. But from there, as usual, civil society sets the foundations for political society. And the vitality of world civil society is becoming more promising recently. But I would like to stop here. We will discuss a little bit, and then maybe I will have the second part of my presentation. So you have questions, comments, criticism, whatever. Don't be shy. Ramin.
Yes, if you permit, first of all, thank you so much for this remarkable thoughts, and I think that it was very illuminating. And but I would like to come back to your idea of ethical cosmopolitanism and complete it a little bit, maybe take both a political but also a philosophical perspective. And I put it in a question. I mean, it's a comment, but I would put it in a question because I would like you and others maybe to react to it. If I go back to my Kant, German philosopher, I would say that it would be maybe difficult if we want to talk about ethical cosmopolitanism if we don't have a view of, let's say, human progress in history, as in the same way as Immanuel Kant describes it. And of course, I'm very much in his favor when he talks, when he says, even thinking of cosmopolitanism and perpetual peace, he thinks that humanity is capable of moral progress. That's why we can talk about cosmopolitanism. If we were not capable of moral progress, it would have been impossible. So I do believe that this is one aspect which becomes very important, and in relation to that, I think that we have to add something that also maybe Kant didn't say it, but he understated it, and this is, if we have this moral progress, therefore we can recognize shared values. And why can we recognize shared values as, let's say, as global actors? Because, as you said, we as global actors, we are global citizens, and we are not only consumers or producers, but we are actors. I mean, this is very important. And it's because we are actors that we can share values, and I think that in that sense, cosmopolitanism would be somehow related to a form of togetherness, which makes sense because actually we are actors and we are different, as we said, without getting very much involved deeply in our identities and becoming fanatics of our identities. But since we are different, we can work together and we can share things, and this is where I would say that the political is added to the ethical and becomes so important. So maybe I would like you to come back to this idea that how this togetherness would be important, and shared values actually would be important when we're talking about ethical cosmopolitanism.
I will try to reply. First of all, yes, humanity is capable of moral progress, but unfortunately also of moral regress. You mentioned Immanuel Kant, and you know, from the same part of the world came, a couple centuries later, the worst after the best. After the moral best comes the moral worst. So the game is always open, and we have progress and regress. In this sense, Kant is not saying, is not Hegel. He's not seeing an inevitable, but you said about a possibility. So I agree with the possibility, but we have to be very careful about thinking that progress is unstoppable or inevitable. We are regressing in many ways worldwide. But the most important part is about shared values. there is an ongoing debate that has been especially related to human rights on universalism versus relativism. It has been conducted also in a pseudo-anti-imperialist mode, saying, you're against the death penalty. You want to impose your Western concepts on me. And so the universalism that we recognize as being human, as being cosmopolitan, is being rejected because it is allegedly the imposition from the center, where there is more power, to the periphery. How do we solve that problem? Because this is not an invention. The center has been imposing all sorts of things to the periphery, and it's still doing it. And yet, this is a very dubious instrument that usually is handled by non-democratic leaders. Non-democratic leaders. Who are they to claim to represent and define the values of millions or billions of people? Who gave them that possibility? And then you have surprises. You have surprises. The Chinese were supposed to be very happy with their red book and a bowl of rice. Well, go to China now. So what were the Chinese values? Spain, with Franco, was, they just went to church and they obeyed the Guardia Civil. Well, go to Spain now. What are the values? Ask the people. And instead of being deductive on values, be inductive. How do people behave when they are allowed to decide freely? My bet is when you do that, there will still be differences, but fewer than we think now, when we give non-democratic leaders the authority to define values on behalf of people who are not even citizens, their subjects. So, after all, this has been proved over and over again, but also within our own country. Think of, for instance, gender issues, North and South. You really think that today, in this southern part of Italy, women have the same values that they had 100 years ago? It was supposed to be fixed. It was supposed to be immutable. Cultures change. It's so true that for centuries, every culture and every religion admitted slavery. Slavery. And in the 19th century, when there was, before the Civil War, by the abolition and so on, you had people finding foundations against slavery, but also for slavery, in the Bible. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. Values change if people are allowed to express their different values through time. If we say that, and if we add that because of globalization, people live in a more similar way, they have to face more similar problems, they use more similar tools, for instance, communications and so on. If this process continues, this idea of relativism and universalism will be emptied of its controversial nature, because it will become empirical. What are the common values? Let's see. My bet is that 50 years from now, nobody will have a death penalty. You know that more and more states are abandoning it. They have moratorium, but unfortunately, right now, 3 countries are very much affection to the death penalty. China, Iran, and the United States of America. They have nothing in common politically, and yet. So, But recently, one more state in the United States abolished the death penalty. And it was abolished and then restated. It changes. There is no inevitable march. But my bet is that certain things, like slavery, will fade out because the values have changed, are changing every day. And if you tie this to the global life we live together, the two things will go together, because you cannot have total disconnect between material life and values. It doesn't make any sense. Material life and values go together, not perfectly. There is a time lag, there are contradictions, but togetherness, as you say, is very important. I remember once reading Albert Camus. There was a phrase. It says, the solidarity of humans that have to face their destiny. Solidarity of humans facing their destiny. Because the problems are so terrifying. Think of what's happening now in Japan. Think of wars, of turmoil, of disease, of financial crisis. It would make a lot of sense to have more solidarity. Not because we're good, but because it's in our interest. You know, there are times when I say that I will have to say it in Italian. Un popolo di diritti è un popolo fesso. If everybody is out for himself or herself, they will all lose. It's almost mathematical, but it's very difficult to impress that upon people. More questions, comments? I've been running a dialogue with Ramin Jahanbegloo for many years now. I don't want to continue that. Yes, please.
I enjoyed your very interesting presentation, but there are 2 points of disagreement, of course, here. And one of them is about the point you are talking about being idiot. I do believe that maybe we are idiot by the build-up of our brain. There are some limitations on cognition abilities. You know, there are some empirical studies run by American scientists that show the size of the network of an individual is limited because of the capacity of his brain to analyze this kind of togetherness, as you like to put it. The Dunbar number is 150, which means that the maximum number of people you can come to keep it as a circle of friends, as a circle of connections is limited. And the reason is behind the ability of your brain. The neocortex of your brain cannot simply process a lot of connections. Another point is about the choice of word. You know, in the World Future Studies Federation, we are usually discussing a number of changing in our discourse or in our construct of words. For example, very recently there was a very hot discussion in our federation about not using globalization, because this term may connotate a greed for more power or more wealth by post-colonial powers. And they are suggesting to use instead the word planetary to suggest that we are living on a planet, we should be concerned about the future of the planet, the damage to the environment. And I do believe that if even we consider this changing of wording to be a euphemistic term for a very infamous term such as globalization, particularly in developing countries who may interpret globalization as a new phase of colonization. Maybe we can overcome some of this resistance to the idea of becoming cosmopolitan or planetism instead of cosmopolitan. And, you know, when you use cosmopolitan, you need to use with it police or politics. But when you use planetism or planetary, there is no need to talk about this bad aspect of this idea. And another interesting findings of the empirical science is a study by Stanley Milgram, which shows that every 2 persons on the planet are separated from each other through only 6 or 5 degrees, which means that on average every 2 persons everywhere on this planet it can be shown that they are related to each other through 5 or 6 links between them. You know, science and empirical studies provide a good reference point for us to make to develop our scenarios for the future of cosmopolitanism. And I believe that you should take them very seriously in any discussion about the ethics of the cosmopolitanism or the scenarios of cosmopolitanism, or whatever the term you choose.
Let me start from the last one. I totally agree with you. Linguistics, for instance. Linguistics prove the interconnectedness because languages interact, words move, constructs pass from one language to the other. And they reveal that from the most ancient times, there was this connectedness. And you know, you discover things also from the point of view, even archaeology shows things. I didn't know, I went to India for 2 years, and I discovered that the south of India is full of Roman coins, because the Romans were there, even from the Republican period. So there are certain connections that go in the opposite way of essentialism. The mix has always been with us. And also genetics. There are studies by Luca Cavalli-Sforza proving that there is no such a thing as a self-contained race from a genetical point of view. And also, somebody has written that the difference between any 2 humans living on Earth is 0.5 of their genome. 0.5. So, the linguistic, how to define what we're talking about. I think planetary would be okay. You know, the French already don't use globalization, they use mondialization. That it's halfway between globalization and planetary, I think words are important, and I think we should listen to them. But the most interesting part is the limitation of the brain. Well, I recognize the limitation of my brain, but young people are able to handle many. People who handle Facebook are able to handle more links than we are. We normal humans are. I'm amazed. I'm amazed at this capacity to multiply things. Multitasking. This is very interesting. But the intellectual dimension and the moral dimension are not the same. It is so true that if you take a phenomenon like Nazism, it was not the product of intellectually or culturally backward people. Quite the opposite. You know, it's not a joke, but in the heads, if you read the memoirs and stuff, people running concentration camps, then when they were not killing Jews, they were listening to Bach. So, intellectual, cultural, moral, it doesn't fit. A healthy moral world is not made only of altruism. The first thing that the moral dimension contains is self-preservation. I like to quote always Spinoza, who talked about conatus essendi, the urge to persist in your existence. Even things have it, you know, it's their weight. And so you cannot ask of humans that we are totally, well, the saints do that, but it's not required for everybody. The second part is recognizing the other. And here I will quote my favorite philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas, the face of the other. You have to recognize the other human being. But there are people whom we will never see. There are people who are in Libya or in Iran or in anything. What is our moral attitude toward them? There, I would add another dimension that I would call justice. There are certain principles that are applicable, and they should be applicable also to people that we've never seen, but that we know that they exist. All the more so today when we cannot ignore them, because it's enough to switch on the television and we see what's happening to them. So our moral responsibility is becoming in a way more concrete, because again, the material interconnectedness confronts us with problems that we didn't know existed before. Of course, it would be presumptuous to say that we are able to fix everything everywhere. But at least we know, and at least we should know, that our political decisions, for instance, impact on real life of real people. It's not only ideology. Now, some Italians should ask some questions, not just the foreign guests. Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation and for the question. Were really stimulating. And you took the example of justice, and you said about how we have to face the others, even if we don't see them, even if we, well, they exist, but we don't actually know they exist. So you said there are values that have to be shared, that they are common to everybody. So are we going to debate on like natural laws or natural values as the debate on human rights?
You know, natural law is one specific approach to the human rights discourse. It's not the only one. Human rights is also an evolving field. The way they started, it was only about not being tortured and being able to vote and being able to publish your newspaper. Now, human rights are conceived with a wider scope. Now, social, economic, and cultural rights are also included, which are not easy to handle. But there is no way that you can go to somebody in India or in the Central Africa and say, you have the right to publish your newspaper, but not to feed your family. If we do that, then it is true that human rights are an imperialist tool. Either we have human rights in a wider concept where there is something in it for everybody at whatever stage of development, or it becomes very dubious. Our good faith is very dubious. But now, from a theoretical point of view, it's there. The wider conception of human rights has been approved in the United Nations and so on and so forth. Human rights is, I think, one very important approach because it constitutes also a limit to the legitimate pursuit of national interest. Every country, and here I talk about my old profession, diplomat. So-called realists, which are the dominant school of international affairs, say that the only thing that anybody dealing with international relations should do is to pursue, to defend, well, not to impose, national interest. And everything else is rhetoric, idealism, and so on and so forth. I have several objections to that. First of all, countries not only have values, they have also interests, they also have values. Especially countries that aspire to be something and aspire to be important countries. countries have values they pursue. They don't always match with national interest. And sometimes there are glaring contradictions and double standards. Well, right now I live in Washington, so I know what I'm talking about. And Americans are also struggling with that because since it's a big country with big national interest, but also big values, sometimes things come out in a very confused way. What I'm saying is that nobody can only pursue national interest without a reference to value. Also because, paradoxically, even so-called realists, when they have an enemy, they attack the enemy not only with bombs, but on the basis of values. The evil empire, the axis of evil, they're all moral qualifications. So first they say they're realist, and then they start throwing ethical disqualifying epithets. So, and then there is something else, that sometimes pursuing national interest to the detriment of human rights is not realistic because it's short-term. Okay, let's talk about current events. We have a dictator who's on our side, who represses the people we don't like. Okay? So we support him. And then one day what happens? The dictator has fallen. The people have sent him to Sharm el-Sheikh. And the problems have just started there. I can assure you. The game is not over. The game is beginning now in Egypt, for instance. So is realism realistic? Depends. It would have been more. It would have been wiser to operate, to support an evolutionary path towards a more sustainable situation, also based on the respect of human rights and of democratic participation. Yes?
We are talking about human rights and the value of solidarity as a means of communication among people in the world. But is it really possible somehow to consider human rights as something universal that can fit to everybody, or do we eventually run risk in falling in an extreme sense of relativism in this? Like, eventually it's like, I don't know, there is no human right leading to everybody. We're talking about human rights, but what's human right? Define as?
I will answer very simply that human rights is what is perceived as being human rights. I had the example of slavery. Really, there were a couple of crazy guys who were against slavery back a few centuries ago. They said, wow, that's strange. I mean, you're an extremist. You're against slavery. It's normal, isn't it? It's normal. Today, slavery is considered a violation of the most basic, most universal of all rights. That human. Now it seems obvious to us, but it wasn't then. So I don't think there is a book that will be there forever on human rights. Actually, the concept of human rights, as I said before, is expanding. It's covering now areas, for instance, sexual preference. You know, homosexuality has been repressed by all religions in every country, even today. And then less and less, because evidently something is changing. Something is changing. And more people are saying a part of human rights is to live your own sexual preference. And some people are recognizing same-sex marriages. It's very much debated, you know, there is, but in Spain, it's allowed. It's a moving, but humanity is a moving project. It's not only human rights.
But what I wanted to highlight is that there is never a certain point in history when everybody shares the same values.
Oh, no, that's right. The important thing is to keep the exchange open. This is why we're talking about intercultura here. Because if you keep the exchange open, then you will realize the difference will become less sharp, especially, first of all, less violent, and then less sharp, and then there will maintain, luckily, different shades, but they will not be so opposed one to the other. This is what the ambition of this cross-cultural project is. Yes?
You mentioned previously civil society, and I wonder, in your opinion, which is the organism, which is the organism which should govern this kind of exchange? Because, okay, exchange and making, for example, human rights in a negotiating way could be the way, but who owns the responsibility to give a wider line to this exchange? Because I think that civil society is not strong enough yet to do that, to manage to govern this kind of
Yeah. No, you're definitely right. I mentioned civil society because it's more able than states to operate across borders. But without states, without the multilateral system, without the United Nations, civil society, even organized civil society, even NGOs, would have a problem finding that space. Civil society is a precursor of politics, but also a constant stimulus, a constant challenge, a constant criticism to power. Civil society's first role is to tell the truth to power and to challenge power and to say no, and to say this is not the way to do it. It's extremely important. I like to say that when I confess my own ideology, I said I never met a dissident I didn't like, in the sense that you need in every, and I mean every system, somebody who challenges the status quo. Not only politically, but especially morally. There is always something wrong that you should denounce. And civil society is there for that. Okay, so I will, yes.
Just a final thought on your talk. You said that you would bet that in 50 years' time there will be no capital punishment as a one element of your...
Too bad we'll not be around.
Okay.
We could make a bet.
To make a bet. You know, as a professional futurist, I'm always interested in making bets. For the very long term, say 50 years, could you please describe a very rosy scenario and, of course, a nightmare scenario that is showing us the fate of cosmopolitanism?
For the world? Oh, yes.
For the subject of cosmopolitanism.
Absolutely. Things can go deeply wrong in the sense that if fear prevails, and fear is running wild everywhere, if fear prevails, then we could have a strange situation whereby nation-state would be weaker, but they would be, you know, the real nightmare scenario is Somalia, to understand. Because, yes, people who are in favor of freedom, democracy, are very much afraid of a state that's too powerful because, you know, it oppresses it. But if you turn that around and if I have Somalia, then maybe you know that on the other end of the spectrum, there is something even worse. Because the degree of violence and of total horror that arises when you regress to a pre-state and warlord and gang situation, that somebody has talked about neo-medievalism or something like that. It can go deeply, deeply wrong. Also because the economy has introduced more recently such elements of uncertainty, and not only uncertainty, but real regression. For 3 years, I was chairing in Paris, in the Development Assistance Committee of OECD, a working group on conflict prevention, on development assistance and conflict prevention. And one of the things that was very clear by the experts who made studies, sociologists, economists, was that absolute poverty doesn't allow you to predict conflict. Absolute poverty, the real poor areas, they're not the areas where there is war. There is war for 2 reasons. 1, economic regression, and 2, growing inequality. But we have both these days. If you look at the economic data, the so-called Gini coefficient of inequality is increasing everywhere, practically everywhere. I think Brazil is the only country that improved. So, and regression is so evident, even in our own country, especially for young people. This is the first generation that knows that will live worse than their parents. My generation took it for granted that we would be better off than our parents. I mean, these are very deep, huge, tragic, massive phenomena, social and cultural, that could produce something very nasty in the sense that, when there is no hope of improvement and there is a lot of resentment for injustice, then first you grab what you can for yourself and for your own family. And second, you are more willing to listen to those that, if you don't use violence, somebody will run away with your money and with your livelihood, not only with your money. This is the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is not a world state. It would be at different levels of governance. After all, the classics already saw it. They saw a system that would be a mix of monarchy, meaning one country is more powerful than the others. Today it's the United States, but maybe tomorrow it will be China. We will miss the Americans anyway. Then there is a component of aristocracy, meaning some countries that are more responsible, more powerful than the others. The G20, or call it as you wish. And then there is the level of democracy, where there is everybody has a little share. This is sort of mixed system that maybe something like that is emerging. But of course, as you know, the classics had the degenerative, pejorative version of the 3 levels, because monarchy can become tyranny, aristocracy is oligarchy, and democracy is demagoguery. So maybe we have the other 3. If we have the other 3, we are in trouble. To this quandary, how to find a democratic cosmopolis, how can we do it? And she writes that perhaps the answer can be found in the city. Why does she say that? Because if we move upward toward a wider political, cultural, economic dimension of society, we have to address what I was saying before, the need to identify, to feel more comfortable, to operate in a situation where you feel you're in control. You don't feel you're in control on a cosmopolitan level. You have to feel in control. And this is also about democracy. Democracy, of course, we cannot go like in Athens, we all go to the square and vote. But in the city, there are ways of participating that are more convincing. Even in this country, the only positive political phenomenon that I've seen recently is the fact that people, for instance, vote for mayors no longer on ideological things. They identify, they know the person, they judge the person on the basis of actual behavior for the community. This is pretty good. So we have to do both things. As we go for the cosmopolitan governance, we have to take care of the local political and cultural and economic dimension. So we can do these things. And this has also a historical dimension. Before I was talking about empires. there is something that's extremely fascinating in history, the Mediterranean and the, let's say, cosmopolitan cities. Istanbul, Izmir, Thessaloniki, Alexandria. Those were cities that were, Palermo, they were really cosmopolitan. Really cosmopolitan. Then the nation states arrived and they're no longer cosmopolitan because they say, we have the Greeks here, said the Turks. The Turks said, we have, the Greeks said, we have the Turks, we have to get them out. The Egypt, you know, Alexandria had everybody. And the Jews were all over. So this ethnic cleansing that was practiced practically, ethnic and religious cleansing were practiced practically by all nation states, some more violent, some more subtly, has impoverished us, has turned those cities. People tell me, I've never been to Alexandria, but if you go to Alexandria now, it's not what it used to be at the time when Kavafis, who was Greek, lived there and wrote wonderful poetry, or Lawrence Durrell. It's a provincial, because look, being only local means being provincial. We have to rebuild cities that are open to the world. Now, in a way, we are helped by something that we think is a great disgrace and a great horror, meaning immigration. If we want to, we can recreate cosmopolitanism, not in an artificial way, but recognizing what is already there. We just heard the mayor of Cinisello Balsamo say that 50% of the people of Cinisello Balsamo are from somewhere else. So this Cinisello Balsamo, which is not Alexandria or Istanbul, is a cosmopolitan, potentially, if we do not only suffer from that, but if we take this as a new reality that we have to handle in a constructive way. I see this. This is the best scenario. The other one was the worst. This would give... we must answer fears. Again, let me go to conflict. Once I wrote something on why violence? Why conflict? You can put in ideology, the economy, fine, let's put everything in. But it's not natural to slaughter people. To massacre people. It doesn't come natural. There is something else there. So somebody says it's obedience to the leader. No. This is really not the case. You know, it has been proved that German soldiers who were used to kill Jews in the Polish villages before the industrial machine was set up had a choice. Nobody was ever shot for it. You know what happened? They would send you to the front. Of course, it's easier to kill a child with a pistol than to go and fight the Russians. But that doesn't mean that they were forced, were they? They were not forced. So there was not the fear or the thing. The real thing was conformity, because everybody else was there. Everybody else was doing it. If you're interested in this, there is a wonderful book called Ordinary Men by, do you remember the author, Ordinary Men? Anyway, but you will find it. Because it's an empirical study in the sense that some documents were found of a trial of a group of German soldiers who were used in that repression, in that massacre. And for a strange coincidence, the head of the battalion gathered all the people before the beginning of the operation and said, guys, we've been given a terrible job. We have to go there and exterminate all the people in the villages. If somebody doesn't want to, 1 or 2 said no out of 300. So they could do it. But still, this conformity is not even sufficient to explain all situations, especially in the case of, let's take the genocide in Rwanda. What did it was fear. Now, fear is the #1 explanation of the most horrendous. You know, there was a radio in Rwanda of the Hutu extremists saying, the Tutsis are coming to kill you, the Tutsis are coming to kill you. So the Hutus exterminate about 1 million. Fear, which is, of course, doesn't come natural. Somebody has to feed that fear. And what I'm really afraid of now is that fear, also because of the use of the media, spreads very quickly, very effectively. Talk about the media. An American sociologist once had a public opinion poll in a certain area of the United States and divided the sample into 2 different groups. Those who watch television and those who didn't watch television. Because, you know, in America, there are also people who don't watch television. Americans are considered all very much conformist, but there are different lifestyles there. Anyway, and the question was asked, how many murders did we have in our region last year? The people who watched television said 100. The people who didn't watch say 10. There were 12. So the people who were more informed were less informed because they were scared. You know, every time somebody is killed, well, it's like our newspapers. Strage, 2 people killed. Well, I'm sorry for those 2 people, but it's not a strage, you know. And the same thing about the way of putting news. It says, Romeno uccide. I've never seen. I'm from Parma. I've never seen Parmigiano uccide una ragazza. So, fear. Fear is extremely important. I said it's this thing of building cosmopolitan cities and even towns is not easy. And yet I would be a little more optimistic than just reading the ideology would allow. Sometimes, especially in our country, and I must say that this I recognize as being a certain quality of us Italians, on a practical level, we behave better than what people would expect by listening to what we say, because we like to dramatize and to, you know, express it. But then in day-to-day life, and then there is something that's a classic, and I think also Saskia Sassen talks about it in her article that was published in the Republic, I think. She said, you know, there's something very funny, and this happens everywhere. You would ask somebody, what do you think of immigrants? And you said, terrible criminals, blah, blah, blah. And then said, how about those people who live next door to you? No, those are good people. I have people I know in my hometown, even relatives, who they would have voted for Le Pen or Haider or whatever. And then a family from Tunisia settled next door and they had little children. Now, the 2 terrible ladies became 2 angels and they keep the children, they give money to the family. So you see, but this is the whole point. This is what intercultura is all about. You have to transform the abstract into the concrete. Because, you know, I can have an idea of the Chinese or of the Bulgarians, but if I go there as a 17-year-old kid, I live with a family for a year, I go to school, it will be difficult for me to come back and have the same cliches, fears, because the concrete is complex. It's not necessarily good. It can be good or bad, but it's complex. It doesn't lend itself to stereotypes and to stereotypes that produce really fear. And this, of course, is the difference. And I will go back to the interview that was published in Repubblica, was badly mangled, and anyway, because the different solutions have been given to the problem of how to live together being different. When we are different, but we have to live together. Along come the French and they say, everybody's the same. Black, white, Arab, they're all citizens. Great, I mean, I love that. But is it true? Is assimilation real, or is it something very funny? Because this universal human being, if you go and look, it's a Frenchman. The standard is French Republican culture. So assimilation to a model. And some people don't want to be assimilated. They want to live there and be citizens, but from a culture, from their identity includes being a French citizen, but also includes something else. And here I like to quote the book by Amin Maalouf on identity, which is a splendid book. And at the beginning of the book, he said, they ask me who I am, and I say, I'm Lebanese. I say, no, I said, I'm French. I said, what kind of French? Of Lebanese origin. What kind of Lebanese? Arab Lebanese. What kind of Arab? Christian Arab. What kind of Christian? Eastern Christian. And so they say, yes, but what are you really? I said, and I get very angry, because I am all those things. Therefore, assimilation, citizenship is not assimilation. Once Tony Blair, talking about Muslims in the UK, say, if they live here, they have to share our values. They have to share our laws. Values, if they're not contrary to the laws that you have to respect whoever you are if you live in a place, values are your business. And values, of course, include religion, include many things. Laws. The basis for common citizenship is law. This is not assimilation. Also because there is an economic angle to it. If you're theoretically a citizen and then you live in the banlieue, you're unemployed, it's not very appealing. So along come the British. And they say, no, multiculturalism. You stay in your own area, you eat your own food, you have your own priests, you have your own families, and somebody is even saying, well, why not allow them to practice the Sharia for family law? This is tribalism. This is not building a community. So when there is a problem, there is a problem. There is not an identification of, again, citizenship, because it's different tribes. And you know, separate but equal was a slogan of American racists who wanted to prevent integration in schools. So don't believe. If it's separate, it's not equal. You have to build a community of citizens. This is why neither assimilation nor multiculturalism are a solution, and interculturalism is something completely different, because it does not deny difference, but it does not separate different tribes or different ghettos, because this is what they end up being. One good thing about, for instance, the way that immigrants live in Italy as compared to other areas is that, apart from the Chinese who stick together, other immigrant communities are there are very limited territorial phenomena. They are all over the country. If you territorialize difference, then it becomes more critical. If you had 2% of immigrants in every city, or 3% or 5%, the assimilation, which is social assimilation, voluntary assimilation, wouldn't be something. There was once a book by some Italian sociologist on Muslims in Italy, and there was an opinion poll among them, and they said they all wanted to be real Italians with rights and duties, but they wanted to maintain their religion and their culture. So this we will have to do. And this is exactly what was the case of the cosmopolitan cities of the Mediterranean. So let's find a way to I'm not saying the problem is easy. Of course it's easier to live in a small community with people who eat the same soup that you've eaten since you were a child and speak your same dialect, but it's over. It is over. Especially in a country like ours, where young people don't get married and don't have children because it's impossible, because they don't have enough money to buy, even to rent sometimes. So, and this has been going on for a while. So we don't have enough people. We have an economy. Immigrants go where there is work. You know that after the economic crisis, there was a lot of reverse flow of immigrants from several countries. I'm sure about Spain, people going back to Morocco. Immigrants don't go where there is no work. But of course there is work. We are a country which has a negative growth, and since about 20 years ago. Somebody should be thinking that one thing produces the other, right? And maybe the idea, we will not go back to Mussolini saying, well, 10 children is great, but 0 children is bad. It's bad for many, many different reasons. Questions? Yes.
I wanted to see if we can introduce an extra concept in what you said, and that would be the concept of fragility. Fragility, being fragile, which I think it should be important for the futures. Because when I was thinking, when you say that we need to feel in control, and eventually at the global level, or at the level of the city, or at the level of citizenship, I think that it's more difficult. It's getting more and more difficult in today's world to feel in control, because we have this sense that we are more and more fragile. Now, we are more and more fragile, but because we are fragile, we also fragilize the world. You know, media actually. Let's take all the aspects which is fragilizing us. The media, as you said, the information has fragilized us. I mean, it gives us the impression that we are in power. It gives us the impression that we have networks, we can control things. But actually it fragilizes us. But the same with the market economy. I mean, market economy has been fragilizing us very much. I mean, look at Lehman Brothers, they can put down states by fragilizing it because of the network of the economy. And democracy also somehow is an experience, is a political experience which always tells us that democracy itself is very fragile, and political action is also very fragile. So we are always in this sense of being fragile, and as you mentioned, fear and violence both are confessions of fragility of human societies and human experiences. Now, I would add to that, eventually, if we have had, especially in 20th century, but also previously in medieval times with the religions, if we have had totalitarian ideologies, if we had fascism in Italy, Nazism in Germany, Stalinism and also Pol Pot in Asia and elsewhere, and now you have Islamic theocracies and dictatorships around the Middle East, is because they want somehow to obscure this sense of fragility. What do dictators tell you? What do fascists tell you? They tell you you are superhumans, you are superminds, we are not fragile, we are in control. But actually, because it's a kind of obscuring the reality, giving an illusion that we are not fragile. So I would say that, as Hans Jonas said in his book, The Principle of Responsibility, which is such a nice book, the other side of fragility is responsibility. It's because we are fragile that we have to think of being responsible, actually, towards the planet as a futurist. I mean, it's not because we are working with statistics that we are responsible. It's because we know that we are fragile and we are fragilizing the world that we are responsible. So I think this is a concept which is very, very important to understand. And eventually, when we're talking about cosmopolitanism, because cosmopolitanism would be somehow a form of also not only a form of togetherness, but also a form of fragile togetherness, and we have to always have this in mind.
Yeah, I agree with you. When I quoted Camus, the French is "La longue solidarité des hommes aux prises avec leur destin" is beautiful. It's a recognition of weakness from which solidarity arises. Because otherwise, weakness by itself, lonely weakness, produces violence. I mean, it's inevitable. And violent people are weak people. Violent regimes are regimes that are not sure of themselves. A regime that has the soft power, that has the hegemony in Gramscian sense, does not need to use violence. Does not need to use violence. So the weakness is weakness and the fear that's generated by weakness is really a very problematic beast. And here I will link up with the concept of violence that I think Ramil Jambeglu should talk to you about that, but it's okay. Tomorrow. Some people, there is a famous quote by von Clausewitz about war being the continuation of politics by other means. Actually, war is not a continuation of politics. It's an alternative to politics. Because politics means finding ways of pursuing your interest, even of defeating your adversary without violence. Violence is there, war is there, but in no way we can give it the same status from a point of view of civilization, from the point of view of human development, as politics. This has been, some strategists are very comfortable with that idea, but I think we should not be. Non-democratic leaders, and even democratic leaders sometimes, they know that there is this perceived fragility, and they try to soothe it. They can soothe it with narratives that have no connection with reality. So, during fascism, we were the new Roman Empire. We were not. But people like to believe that. But also a situation where people have a miserable life, but they are told that they live in the best country of the world. I'm talking about the United States. It's very strange. You have a public opinion poll in the United States about, do you want to tax the rich? People say yes. But then they vote for a party that's against taxing the rich. There's something there. You have to address that thing, because it means that ideology was not only communist ideology. Because when communism fell, the people wrote books, The End of Ideology. Well, of one. But ideology is thriving everywhere. And it's an ideology that foments and constructs make-believe. People want to believe and be comforted of their fragility and of their fears. So this is why intellectuals and critics have a function saying, it's not that. They're trying to sell you adulterated goods. It's not easy. More questions? Yes.
You were talking about stereotypes coming from distance, for example. So we have a lot of immigrants, and most of the people think that they are kind of dangerous because it's what the idea is spreading through media, for example. But I'm afraid there is also, of course, I obviously agree with you on the fact that Intercultura, that's what's doing all the day, all the time. But I'm afraid there is also another kind of stereotype coming from the closeness with people. I'm not talking about getting to know actually people, like the case you mentioned about getting to know the neighbors.
Yeah.
So in that case, of course, we get to know their personal history of the person, and it changes everything.
Yes.
In our mind. Yeah. But when we live with strangers or foreigners, immigrants, whatever, and we don't get to talk to them, for example, but we just see and perceive their presence in the way that they are like stealing our jobs, or their kids are taking all the places in the free kindergarten and stuff like that. So, unfortunately, not everybody has the chance to talk directly and get to know the personal histories of those immigrants. I'm wondering if there is a chance for regular people to get to understand better the situation they're going through.
You're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, I think that this intercultural mode should not be applied only internationally, but first should be applied at home, because now abroad has arrived. The foreigners, we don't have to go and look for them, they're here. So the same problems and the same pattern is with us. It's next door. So this is, of course, is true. You know, there is a component that is cultural, that's moral, that's ideological. But not only that. Let's take criminality. It is very curious that when we talk about crime committed by immigrants, we don't think about the weakness of the legal mechanism in our country for everybody. A criminal who is today in Romania or Albania and has to choose a country, where would you go? Would you go to Germany? No. Because we are the weak link. Not because we are, from the point of view of organization, of judicial system, of police coordination, we are the weak link. So, it's no wonder that criminals, who are criminals but not stupid, they prefer to go in a place. You know what is the percentage of crimes that is actually pursued? And very little. So it's rational to be a criminal in this country. It is rational because the chances of being caught are very minimal. So, second, welfare. If you have good schools, enough teachers, then the fact that there are immigrant kids, you don't feel that it is a zero-sum game. If the immigrant kid sacrifices mine, but you would need a more robust, preschool, schools, elementary, and I don't think it's coincidental that Italians have become more sensitive to this problem, not only because of the numbers, but also because this is happening at a moment when welfare is shrinking. So, if the pie is getting smaller, the fact that there are more people coming to eat it is more delicate. I'm saying this because there is not only ideology, which there is some ideology and some people who foment it, but there are also very good reasons. First, the weakness of the state in Italy, the weakness of the state, and the shrinking of the welfare. There are two huge things that impact on the perception of the immigrant. And that, they're not responsible for that, but I think we citizens, we Italian citizens should be. Or even if you want me to say something more on one of the things that we talked about, something that you found more interesting that I can... Yes?
You talked about the global city, which maybe was not too much the point of your presentation, or maybe what it was supposed to be, but doesn't really matter. But in a global city, I mean, it's still a city. Is there still a feeling of belonging, or is there still a category? I mean, we are citizens, we are something. What about people, as you said, stateless, who come over? What about refugees who cannot go back to their countries?
Okay.
How would that work in
Yeah,
a global city?
Absolutely. You know, as I said, I live now in the United States, and I lived there also before. What is really impressive is the fact that people who hardly speak English, who have arrived a year ago, they feel American. They identify as citizens. Once I was on a taxi, and the taxi driver spoke to me in English, but the accent was Spanish. So I spoke to him in Spanish, said, "Hey, where are you from?" He turned around and said, "Look, mister, I used to be Peruvian, but now I'm American. I'm so American that I'm Republican." Because as you know, usually immigrants were for the Democrats because they were for the poor. Now I'm so American that I'm Republican. Wow, this is powerful. This is the capacity really to...
Well, that's the capacity of the United States.
Yeah, but I think in this country we have other tools, but the attraction of our culture for everybody, let's be clear, because we can criticize our culture, but it's very attractive. The way we eat, the way we dress, the way we interact with each other. All my friends, when they say, Italy, oh, you're in Washington. Why are you not in Italy? It's the best country in the world. You see what I mean? I think we could do it. We have something that, but of course, if we spoil it with other dimensions, which are not cultural, they are political, organizational. We have to get our act together, as they say. But I think we can. Yes, we can. Yes, Susanna.
I'm just fishing for some ideas because I have to do the last day some kind of summary. And I think you said the first point that it's to put cosmopolitan on an ethical basis, more than intellectual. So let's take
Yes.
And you made this example that, like the Nazis, they were intellectually not poor, but
Yeah.
they do ethics. And then I think, if I can summarize, you said that we cannot assume we share values. We have to share laws or rules in the place we are. And I would add, and look for common values. So somehow it's a process, somehow. Now, how would you foster the development of a cosmopolitan attitude, competence? I mean, I agree with that. I just have a question, what is the role of the intellectual part? I mean, my work is mainly with children.
Yeah.
And I think empathy and even somehow common responsibility is somehow easier. It's curiosity that worries me.
Yes.
Because I think that if you are not curious about somebody being different, and that curiosity makes it interesting that somebody is different, it's very, so how would you foster that, thinking about fostering development? I cannot use the word of politics, formazione.
No, but
How would you foster it?
first of all, being exposed to difference is not sufficient, but it's necessary. First of all, being exposed to it. Second, familiarize with it. Third, and this is the task of teachers, to perceive that difference can be not only something to be tolerated, but something that gives you something plus, something that you didn't have before. So, for instance, if children in an elementary school are able to explain the tradition of their country, it's very simple, it's very basic. I'm sure that teachers already do it. But children are curious. It's the grown-ups that are no longer curious. Children are naturally curious. It would be strange if they were not, to see how funny they have, or someday they bring food from their own traditions. Something very concrete that children can be, or toys, or games, or...
I challenge this. It's what is called somewhere couscous education. So I think children are better one step farther. That's something, but that's not so interesting. It's just, for instance, language, for instance, concepts. The fact that you name, that your father or your mother or your grandfather differently. Concept like the dual in Greek, which is, I think we should go all, we are in Italy, this, that you celebrate the China New Year, but you don't have an idea what are ideograms.
Yeah, but so that is for yes, but that is for high school. I'm talking about...
No, I'm talking about young children. 0-6. Well, language, I mean, the 80% of linguistic structures, passive linguistic structures are there before the child is 24 months. So I think we are missing this great, a great opportunity of reading.
The capacity to absorb it, yes.
So the intellectual...
I know that you work with small children, yes. I know you work with small children, but I don't know what you could do. But you mean languages? Yeah, languages. You know, when they're small, a couple languages are enough.
Well, most our children are monolingual, and most immigrant children are bilingual. And
yeah,
we work on that.
We should make all at least bilingual. All at least bilingual. Oh yeah, no, that of course.
Make them bilingual if you think about language.
No, I know, but this is very tricky. But I wanted to say something else about the difference between intellect and ethics.
Exactly.
One of the biggest historical challenges to the ethical world of us Europeans was the discovery of America. There is a wonderful book by Tsvetan Todorov, The Discovery of America. And then at a certain point he says, knowledge doesn't work. Cortés, the conquistador, knew the Indians very well. Very well. He learned language, and he slaughtered them, he massacred them. Bartolomé de las Casas didn't have a clue who they were, and he wrote in their defense saying, well, look, they're human beings. So, intellect, knowledge and ethics, they don't go together, unfortunately. But I believe in knowledge.
There are two concepts like curiosity and motivation where they go together.
Yeah, I agree with curiosity.
To something with your head, and if you're motivated, it has to do with your...
Yeah, but how do you develop curiosity in a culture that has become, thanks to television, very passive? Even children, they absorb. But curiosity is also looking for something, not just being. Because curiosity means also choosing. You know, I'm afraid that you have a tough job there. A very tough job. 15 more minutes. talk about conflict, well, I like to talk about conflict. Conflict and cosmopolitanism. I don't think in any way cosmopolitanism is like the Garden of Eden. We will maintain differences, we will maintain controversy, we will maintain different political options. But it's like, again, let me talk about my own previous profession, diplomat. I always find it very curious that people, diplomats, who would never approve of somebody who said, in order to pursue the interest of your political party or your business, you can cheat and kill, you know. But suddenly, when we go beyond the borders, we all become Machiavellian. Nobody would defend Machiavelli as a model for internal politics, right? Maybe some people practice it, but they would never defend it theoretically. But once you move outside, since it's something else, since you don't recognize moral responsibility, then people become Machiavellian. If you have to cheat or to kill, it's okay, you're justified. Now, this is probably one of the most delicate and most crucial dimensions of international relations. The problem is that people don't say it, they say it explicitly, but there is always an excuse. And the excuse, again, is fear. The excuse is attributing to your adversary the worst intentions. International politics these days is based on projecting the worst fears on the other side. And this is conducive to conflict. Cosmopolitanism would not imply the final solution of the political problem, but probably the beginning of real politics. The beginning of real politics. Today, politics is phony, is artificial. Because you push button, I am in charge, and nothing happens. Because you don't control anything anymore, anything important anymore, within each country. It's like, you know, in Italy we decided not to have nuclear energy. And we have French nuclear power station right across the border. So if something wrong happens, God forbid, our policy of being against the nuclear will not save us, will not save us. Evidently, we need to find some other way of addressing those concerns. Same thing, terrorism. You know, armies, bombers, CIA. Where is Bin Laden? And where is Al-Qaeda, which is by now franchising? It's no longer 4 people in a cave in Afghanistan giving orders to everybody. No, no, no. It's all over with some context. But evidently, we are fighting with a hierarchical and national, with some cooperation, but not much, tools, something that's global. Al-Qaeda is more cosmopolitan than the states. Because now, in Spain, people who put the bomb in the Atocha station in Madrid, they had never seen somebody from Al-Qaeda. And still they claimed that identification and that link. They took the explosives from a mine in Spain. So it means that there is a way of operating that goes here and there. There were Moroccans, and yet we're still there. We are on the border saying nobody passes here, I hear, and then people come from below, above. It's pretty ridiculous and pathetic. More than ridiculous, it's really pathetic. But having worked for 40 years for a state, I know that states don't give up the pretense of their sovereignty. The pretense of their sovereignty. Sovereignty is important, but sovereignty has to be interpreted in its real meaning, not in its rhetorical meaning. First, sovereignty does not help you when problems are not national but are transnational or global. And second, sovereignty cannot allow you to go outside the rules. To go outside the rules. Otherwise, that's one more reason for conflict. I repeat, cosmopolitanism should do two things. First, create a wider scope for political action. Second, allow us to operate within that framework by a moral compass that is not different from what we expect within previous communities. We just have to project whatever is expected of us. I mean, within the nation state, can we pursue our interest? Yes. Yes. Are we different? Yes. Dialects are still there. Social classes are still there. Political parties are still there. We just have to project the same variety, but the same within rules, within common rules, and within common moral recognition to a wider state. It's not conceptually so difficult, but it is politically very difficult. Because where is cosmopolitan democracy? Is it the UN? The UN is not one man, one vote, is one country, one vote. And then some countries are more equal than others in the Security Council. Is the UN a democratic tool? Not much. The General Assembly is there, but again, in the General Assembly, Luxembourg has as many votes as India. So one guy from Luxembourg has a real power compared to a poor Indian in the General Assembly. So it's very imperfect. Probably we should forget the idea of having, the World Parliament or something like that. But find different levels. After all, there is a theory that was developed and put in practice in Europe. It's called subsidiarity. You address political problem at the lowest possible level closer to the citizen, and then if you cannot handle that, you move to the next stage. But if you apply subsidiarity, then energy, terrorism, finance goes global, goes cosmopolitan. If you apply subsidiarity, not an ideology, a cosmopolitan ideology, but a very pragmatic way of locating the handling of a problem where it can be handled. Otherwise, you're fooling yourself and you're pretending that you control what you do not control. I'm afraid that right now, states are pretending to control what they cannot control. And this is very dangerous because it creates also a dissatisfaction with politics as such. The citizen, since nothing important is being done by that old framework, withdraws into individualism, tribalism, localism. So instead of moving forward, we move backwards. So this is the worst scenario, moving backward from the nation state, attacking the nation state and politics as being corrupt, insufficient, which is true, and instead of seeing that the only solution is going forward, you go back home, shut the doors, and with your gun, you look out for enemies. I would like to conclude with a reference, because sometimes literature explains things better than essays or books with footnotes. And Franz Kafka once wrote a story on a sort of mole underground. In English it's called the den or something like that. La tana in Italian. La talpa. It refers to the place, not to the animal. And the burrow, maybe. Anyway, so this being is there, listens, and there are some predators who want to break in and kill. This obsession of being invaded, and this fear. So I add, if somebody asks the mole, what should I do so that you will not be afraid? The mole said, go and kill the predators, their children, destroy their homes so that I can be free of this fear that is so total and so unsustainable. And unfortunately, I would add that now the mole has a television which takes real problems and real threats and magnifies them. So don't ask the mole to be in favor of dialogue, of tolerance, of nonviolence. The mole is dangerous because more dangerous, more afraid, more dangerous. And because the mole is in a hole. The world has dangers, but not only dangers, but for that creature, there is only fear, obsessive fear, pathological fear, taking real problems, as I said, real dangers, and making them as the only game in town, the only thing that exists, the only concern. If fear is the only concern, then there will not be any cosmopolitanism, there will be a collapse of any social cohesion, and everybody will grab whatever they can and pull out the pistol and try to defend themselves, this is the worst scenario. This is the anti-cosmopolitan scenario. Okay, thank you.